Let's begin our journey, friends. So you know the story in the parsha that one of the stories is that Avram pleads before God to spare Sodom and Amorah, or actually 5 cities who were very corrupt, pleading that if there were 10 people, 10 righteous people in a city, it should save the city, or 10 righteous people to save all of them. The end was it wasn't found, and Hashem destroyed them. But in the course of his pleading before God, God has made a decision and he's asking to appeal it. So he says, and I am but Afar va'efer. Afar with an ayin means dust, and efer means ashes. Simple meaning in I, who am I? Dust and ashes. But excuse me, but I'm pleading for their well-being. Now, just the simple meaning is what or a little bit deeper, dust and ashes, because I would have been ashes, not for you, was going to be burnt alive in his story there and his youth, right? When Nimrod summoned him and demanded that he renounce his heresy, his belief in one God, or face the furnace, and he was ready to die, be burnt alive, so I would be ashes if not for you. I'd be dust also, meaning I'd be dead and my body would return to earth, if not for you, because we just read how he had fought against 4 kings who had captured his nephew Lot in that very elaborately described story in the Torah. So I would be ashes and dust if not for you. That's like a deeper meaning. You saved me on these occasions. So that contributes to his humility. I'm here because of your grace, and I'm nothing. I would have been reduced to ashes and to earth. And he continues to plead his case, as we just described briefly. Now, I gave you the quote from the Gemara. The Gemara says in Tractate Soitin in Chulin that in reward from Avram saying these 2 things, his children, that's you and I, merited 2 mitzvahs. One that involves ashes and one that involves dust. And what are they? The ashes is the mitzvah of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. The red heifer, which is the agency by which to bring purity to someone who's defiled, impure because of being in contact with death. So it's a red heifer, and it's slaughtered, and then it's entirely burnt, and it's mixed with water from a spring. And inside that there's a hyssop, Azov, Agudas Azov, a bunch of this. It's a very mystical commandment. And we got that because he said, I would be ashes. And we got the mitzvah of Saita. The mitzvah of Saita is a woman who the husband suspects of being suspects of fidelity. Why? Because he asked her not to be in seclusion with a particular fellow, and she was, and there were witnesses they were in seclusion. And so she's tested by the waters of the Saita, and the waters of the Saita have in it earth, a little bit of earth taken from the floor of the Mishkan or the Mikdash of the sanctuary. Bit of earth. So because Avram said these 2 things, so therefore we merited these 2 mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, we have to understand this a little bit deeper. The connection is not just because, well, ashes here, he said ashes, we get the mitzvah of the red heifer. He said dust, so we get the mitzvah of the Soita. There must be, however, it's not just a word association, but there must be an association, a very deep association, intrinsically between what Avram is saying and in his profound humility and these 2 particular mitzvahs. So what's the connection? Now, if we look at trying to understand the connection, our question becomes stronger because there seems to be no connection, and moreover, they're opposites. Why? Avram, who is he? He's all about chesed. He's all about love, loving God, this fellow human being. There's an interesting quote here. I won't explain it, but just the quote itself, nonetheless, is still very powerful. There's a Kabbalah book called Sefer HaBoyer, the Book of Brilliance. and it's like a medrash. And it says there that the divine attribute came before God with a complaint. Again, it's what does that mean that the attribute speaks? But the idea we'll get. And it says, I'm not needed. Since Avram walks the earth, he reveals your attribute of kindness much more than I do. It's a cryptic statement. It needs explanation in its own right, but it does tell us that he embodied kindness in the most incredible way. That the divine attribute, the mid of chesed, says, God, you don't need me, which means you don't have to express yourself this way. Avram expresses you deeper than the way you express yourself through me. So that is Avram. What's Paraduma? Paraduma is all about Gevura. First of all, it's a calf. And the calf comes from an ox. And an ox is Gevura, just literally, ox is powerful and it's moil, it's Gevura. Especially, it goes to detail, Kabbalah, the hay, the word paraduma is par ox, that's Gevura. And hay, 5, also denotes Gevura. Gevura means division, strictness, severity. There is hey Gevuras in Kabbalah, 5 expressions of severity. Just to give you a little bit of understanding, it manifests in the fact that there are 5 organs of speech. There's the simple sound, but to break it down into particular words, division, there's 5 organs of speech, the tongue, the palate, and so on. So the lips. So chesed is all about giving. Chesed is not about division and compartmentalizing. It's the opposite of gevura, but the paraduma, again, the ox and the hay, it all points to gevura. And its color, it's red as opposed to white. White is chesed, and red is gevura. Is restraint, is judgment. Moreover, interesting medrash, making a question stronger. The conditions of the paraduma are like this. The Torah says, red, completely red, no blemish, and never wore a yoke. So these 4 descriptions refer to the 4 exiles that the Jewish people have endured. And the 4th one, no yoke, that refers to the final exile of the Roman exile that we're in now. Previous ones, red and pure refer to Persia, before that Bavel, before that Egypt. So all of the he's asking, all of the conditions of the paraduma are all severity, exile, it's all gevura, exile, the opposite of Avram, who's chesed. So how does he merit? What's his connection to this mitzvah altogether? The explanation. A very profound explanation, friends, and a very challenging one. There's 2 kinds of chesed, 2 kinds of benevolence. There's a person benevolent and charitable and giving, philanthropist. So that's why, because he's a big fellow, tzaddik gdula, a king, very wealthy, and because he feels it's not arrogance, but it's a consequence of his embracing and reveling and enjoying his wealth, and he therefore shares it. He shares it with others. Implicit in all of that subtly is others should know it, and others should benefit from his wealth. So there's an element of, more than an element perhaps, it's an ego thing. He's expansive and giving, and he very much enjoys that role. He's the giver and the recipient and all the attention that comes along with that, etc. I mean, Halavidus was everybody's problem that had wealth. But that's one way to give. People will say that makes me feel good. And for them, that's the ultimate. I do it because it makes me feel good, as if that's the ultimate, the ultimate motive. And that's chesed, and that kind of chesed, even if it's, he says like this, even if it's for good things, it can eventually, slippery slide, end up in being a chesed, which is purely egotistical and sometimes giving inappropriately, supporting inappropriate things. Because if it gets you glory, it gets you glory. He points out here that Yishmael, just know this historically, Avram's the father of Yishmael. Yishmael, the Arab world, is all about hospitality and all about giving and all about sharing. Even the enemies invited into your house, he'll stab you in the back, but it'll all be done with the greatest hospitality and so on. My brother, an embrace. In contrast to Esav, who was born from Yitzchak, Yitzchak is the opposite of Avram. He's all gevura in holiness, demanding and restriction and self negation, etc. So Yitzchak gives birth to Esav. Esav is that kind of, so for Esav, that translates not in giving, but in violence. He's negative gevura. Take away from the other person. The indulged child, that's Yishmael, or the over-disciplined child, the rejected child that becomes angry all his life and is violent. All to say, summarize, so there's two ways to give. So one way is what we're just describing now. That's the natural way. You have and you enjoy giving, and it's expression of your magnificence, such a word, magnificence. Then there's the opposite way to give. Why is he giving? Because why should I have it? It's out of humility. My son told the story, Levi, the second day of Rosh Hashanah. He asked my father once, my father should be well. You know, my father would get a phone call, whatever, from Rabbi Groner, he's called him by his first name. We short the payroll, such and such amount of money. It's a big school, friends, 2 schools, 1,000 children, more. Finished. Okay, all right. So my father sent the check. I mean, in theory, it was a loan. He didn't. What it was paid back or not is another story. But obviously, sometimes, many times not. But my son asked my father, like, so he just get a regular calls you and you write the check. My father answered without missing a beat. He said, I'm in business and they wish to help that I'm successful. And this fellow is a teacher and he's, struggling to make ends meet. I'm better than him. This is me. I'm in this position. What am I better than him? It took no claim for his success. God's doing. And on the contrary, he had the privilege to be God's distributor and help others. My father should be well. My mother's even more so. He was shocked. I mean, well, we knew, but after my mother passed away, jewelry was nothing to fight over, friends. It was nothing to fight over. And the house we lived in, the cars they drove, my mother drove a little Honda, and my father drove the same car for 30 years almost. Lived way below our means. Growing up, we didn't know that my father was that successful financially. We didn't know that because we didn't live like that. That's Avram's chesed. Now, Rome was a very, very high level, and this is a level where you give most of what you have away. This is a very high level. And he kept for himself what he needed, the minimum. He saw himself as humbled by God's grace as a trustee. Now we see by Avram that his whole life was about giving and sacrifice for the others. And he wasn't sacrificing as a martyr. It was like it's a privilege. And where do we see this? First, physically, puts his life in danger to save his nephew, fighting against 4 kings. But more so, we see how spiritually he was a life of sacrifice. It's an incredible story we just read. It's the 3rd day after his circumcision. This is the beginning of the parsha. Hashem appears to him. Listen to this. God appears to him. And we learn from here the mitzvah to visit the sick. And he sees in the distance 3 Arabs. And it's an extremely hot day. And he says to Hashem, excuse me, I've got to go and attend to them. And he gives up. This was a bigger sacrifice than to fight the war and save his nephew, Lot. He gives up his communion with God in order to attend to the needs of travelers who were the Arabs, and he made them wash their feet right away. Rashi explains why, because they worshipped the dust on their feet. Imagine the mentality that they were at. They worshipped the dust on their feet. Whatever, that needs to be understood. But certainly they're idolaters and they're not and he's attending to them in pain, 3rd day of circumcision, and forgoes divine revelation. So now we'll understand, and we'll conclude very quickly, there's been a lot of detail to this, but we'll understand why these 2 mitzvahs are a direct consequence of who he was, and he bequeaths it to us. The mitzvah of the paraduma and the soita. And that briefly is the paraduma. What's it all about? It's all about bringing purity to someone who was contaminated by the worst kind of contamination, death, which means not life, it's spiritual death. It's manifestation of spiritual death, cut off from God. And here's the clincher. In order to make the para aduma, the ashes, everything, all the koyanim involved in the process of making the shchita, the burning, all became ritually impure for a day. It means for that day they couldn't serve in the temple. Why? To bring purity to someone who is transgressed, who is in a state of spiritual death. That's Avraham. That's Avraham. What's unique in this mitzvah is that the ones doing it become defiled. That's Avraham. Sacrifice their own spirituality for another Jew. And which Jew? A Jew was like externally cut off. Spiritual death. Likewise, the soita. What's the whole point of the soita drinking the waters? The objective is not find her guilty and have her killed. The objective is to restore the husband's faith in her, to bring peace. And moreover, one of the processes of making this water, this potion that she drank, is Torah says you have to write on a parchment that section of the soita where God's name appears, and put the parchment in the water so that all the ink is dissolved, mixed in the water, and she drinks that. Now it's a severe prohibition to erase God's name. You have a siddur or chumash at home, it gets old, you can't discard it, it has to be buried. Here, our sages say, God said, erase my name to bring peace between husband and wife. God's sacrifice, as it were. His own glory and honor in order to bring peace. And then she's blessed. She didn't have children, she has children and healthy children, etc. The Gemara says, in fact, that women who were childless used to feign this, pretend, create a situation of being in seclusion in order to be tested, in order to get the bracha. So again, that's consistent with Avraham. God is sacrificing, as it were, his own glory to bring peace between husband and wife. And just to understand the story, even when it was true that they were in seclusion, but nothing happened. That's already something wrong with that. You're not allowed to be in seclusion with another person of another gender, and your husband asks you not to. So it's not 100%. Even with such a person, if nothing happened, God says, erase my name and restore her. She's going to do tshuva. She's going to come out of this, and their marriage is going to be strengthened. That's Avraham. Doing a kindness for other person, even when, and especially when it hurts you physically, hurts, unquote, and spiritually. We learn this from the ashes, the paraduma, and the saita. All right, friends, we're already at 7. Have a wonderful Shabbos.